Hi, everyone. Welcome to tonight's event. My name is Robin Tiberio, and I'm the co-chair of the Schools Committee for the UVA Club of Washington, D.C. We're very excited to have you here tonight. The UVA Club of DC, for those of you that don't know, we put on programming for UVA alumni, parents, and friends, generally in the DC area, but in time of COVID, we're having folks join from all over the country, which is great. And so tonight we have the changing landscape of testing and college admissions in the year of COVID-19 with our speaker, Ann Dolin. If you've joined us before, you'll know Ann. She does this event for us typically about once a year. Some of the programming is going to be the same, but she has changed some things to put a little bit more of a COVID slant on it to address what has changed for so many of our students over the last year. So. With that, I will go ahead and turn it over to Ann. She is the president and founder of Educational Connections Tutoring, and she is a wealth of knowledge. So welcome, Ann.
So what are the first steps when you think of whether or not your child is going to take the test? Well, first of all, I think it's the best idea to take a practice test. So you don't have this in your record, but this is just your personal information. We offer practice tests all the time in the community. They're most Saturdays, they're 9 o'clock, kids roll out of bed and they can take a practice test. And these are retired tests, so they're very, very similar to what kids take now. They're issued by the College Board, which produces the SAT and the ACT. And what we recommend is that kids take a practice test late in their sophomore year or early in their junior year. And you want to take a practice test really for two reasons. Number one, you want to determine which is your natural best test, because what we found and what lots of data shows is that about a third of the kids taking both tests, they will have a natural strength in one test over the other. So whatever test they score better on, that's really their best test to take, to practice and to take. And the reason is you don't need to spend a ton of time lots of time studying for both tests. You really just need to practice and prepare and take one test, either the SAT or the ACT, because every school in the country that's not test blind takes either test. They do not care. Schools do not have a preference. So taking a practice test, one of each, helps determine whether you have a natural strength. Now, for the other 2/3 of kids, it really is a toss-up. They're pretty much scoring the same. And so for those kids, we'll often say, which test did you feel most comfortable with? All right, so the second reason a practice test is helpful is it helps you to establish a baseline score. So you can see, my score is this, I want it to be that, I'm gonna need to have more leeway for studying. Sometimes kids will come to us and they'll just knock it out of the park their first time out, and they're already close to their target score. They may not need to prepare that much, and they might be able to take the test early in their junior year. So there's lots of factors and about when you'll take the test, but in general, taking that practice test can really help guide your decisions about what test and then your testing timeline. And by the way, if you want to get a list of practice tests that your child can sign up for, you can just text this number 55444, the word college, and I'll send you the practice test dates. And then there's also an article on test optional versus test blind schools that you can read about. Okay, so this is the question I hear all the time. What is a good score? And honestly, it's a hard question to answer because it totally depends on where your student wants to attend. Where do they want to go to school? I'll take the example of William and Mary. Even though they're test optional now, if you look back at their data from last year's entering class, you can see that there is something called a mid-50th percentile range for accepted freshmen. And this tells us that for the kids that they accepted, they had scores on the SAT reading between 1660 and 740 and math between 1660 and 770. So that means that if your child wants to submit their score, it should be in that range, hopefully at the latter end of that range. If they're taking the SAT, the high score on the SAT is a 36. They want to be in between 30 and 34. Hopefully the higher end, that's even better, and they should submit a score. So let's talk about the differences in the tests, because they are actually fairly different tests. And it's interesting when kids take them, they will often say, I like this one better than that one. I hear this a lot. The kids have very strong opinions. You know, for the SAT, we often hear from kids that they like the pacing of the SAT better. And here's the reason. It's considered a power test. There are fewer questions on the test, so you can go at an easier pace, not so fast paced, but they are actually wordier and they require quite a bit of critical thinking and analysis. So the difficulty with the SAT isn't really the getting through it. It's really, what are they asking me? And let me think about that for a second. Whereas the ACT, the difficulty in the ACT is the quick pace. It's considered a speed test. So there are fewer questions and they're shorter questions, but they're definitely much more straightforward. And so for that reason, a lot of kids will say things like, oh, the questions on the ACT felt more like questions I see in school. That's what we call them student friendly. So again, you know, it tests actually a broader scope of skills, but the difficulty is in the fast pace that you have to go to finish each section. And by the way, if your student happens to have a 504, an IEP, or any accommodations where they get extra time, usually it's time and a half, typically the ACT is the best choice. And again, the reason is the difficulty is in the speed. So if you take away that speed factor, you're left with straight up questions. And so kids with accommodations tend to go towards the ACT. So let's dive into both of these tests. So the SAT has two sections, that's it. It has math, which actually within it has two sections, calculator and no calculator, and the high score is 1,800 points. And then there's evidence-based reading and writing, which is 800 points. And one of the biggest changes to both the tests is that there is no more essay, meaning that kids are not given a prompt anymore and have to write to an essay. That part is gone. So when you see evidence-based reading and writing, the writing is not a free write, but instead the writing is grammar. And often kids, and I'd say more so kids in public schools, they tend to have difficulty with this because they haven't done as much grammar. So often they need brushing up in that area. Again, the total is 1,600 points, and it's about a 3-hour test. Now the ACT is different in that it has 4 sections. It has math, but there is no section that has no calculator. Everything is calculator based. There's reading comprehension. There's writing. And again, this is just grammar. And then there's a science section. And often kids see the science section and they say, oh, I didn't like physics. I don't like chemistry. I didn't like biology. I don't want to take this test. But actually the science section is the most coachable section. And that's primarily because it's a lot of data interpretation and understanding graphs. It's kind of like reading comprehension. So the total is 36 points. And I just realized I did not fix this from the last time I used this when this changed, that there is no essay on the ACT either. It's completely out the door. And again, this is still a long test, a little bit shorter, but just under 3 hours for the ACT. All right, so how do you decide when your child should take a test? Certainly that baseline test to determine, you know, should you go the ACT route or should you go the SAT route is important. But then from that, you can decide, okay, this is my child's score. They need to improve this much. And based on their life, like their sports, other extracurricular activities that go on during the year, things like AP exams, I want them to take it at this time. So right now, I'll talk a little bit just about juniors, and then I'll revert back to sophomores. Juniors right now, when they look ahead to what's left in the year, they might take the ACT, say in April and June, or maybe April and July, or June and July. And the reason we recommend pairing test dates is that now you have a plan. Because if you just sign up with one test and you really don't have an idea of where you're going with this, it's actually much harder. So we've had better experiences when kids just say, you know what, these are my dates. And as much as possible, sign up early because tests get booked up early now. And you'll get your score back about 2 weeks after you take the test. So let's say you take an April test, you get the test back 2 weeks later, you look at your score, and then you can prep in your weakest areas and then take it again in June. So for the SAT, it might be that you're going to take this year a May and a June test. Although the summer dates haven't been released by the College Board, typically it's an August date as well. But statistically speaking, kids score their best the spring of their junior year. And the reason is they're older, they're more mature, and they have more curriculum under their belt. So often parents will come to us and they'll say, oh, I just want my child to get all their testing out of the way, like the summer before the junior year or the fall of their junior, and we just want to be done with it. Maybe there's so many factors. For example, what math is your child in? What is their baseline score like? If they're already crushing it, fine. But if they've got a ways to go, that might not be such a great idea. Also, what are their grades like? Is it the case that maybe they should spend a lot of time working on their grades and consider test scores later, because grades are more important than test scores? Or it could be that the fall is actually better for the student because they're a varsity player and they're super booked and they're not going to have time to do it in the spring. So there's lots of factors. And when kids take a practice test with us, we'll jump on the phone with them and their parents, or just the parents, and kind of talk through the testing options and what dates would be good for their child, because it is a little bit different for every student. But we recommend that kids take the test 2 or 3 times. That's usually ideal. All right, so how do kids get ready? Well, there's actually lots of ways. They can go to Barnes & Noble and buy a book and practice independently. And I have no problem with this way. And part of it is because even right now, the test is still given paper and pencil. So it's perfectly fine to practice in this manner, especially if you have a super motivated kid who's already scoring at the very high end. They may be fine just on their own. Sometimes kids will want to practice online, and there's tons of free resources. Most public high schools have a program called Naviance, which allows kids to go in and look to see who has graduated from their school that, say, got into UVA or William and Mary or JMU, and what were their test scores and their grades like. And that's very valuable information. But what parents don't always realize is that Naviance also has some free preparation services online. The ACT has some free programs, and so does the SAT. They've partnered with Khan Academy. But most kids want something more structured than kind of going it on their own. And for that reason, they might take a group class, which for the most part is online right now, or they may work with a tutor one-to-one, which is what we do. I personally believe that's really the most helpful way, because every student's baseline is different, and the things you're going to practice are very different from somebody else. But ideally, whatever way you practice, you want to space it out over time. You don't want to say, well, I'm taking the test in May, therefore I'm going to prepare 2 weeks before and take a boot camp. Those things aren't highly successful because your brain doesn't process information like all in one lump sum. It needs time you need time to learn the material, practice the strategies, sleep on it, learn some more. That type of pacing is much better for retention, doing well on the test. So why does all this matter? And it matters because a small increase in your test scores can make a big difference in whether you get into a school, especially a competitive one. And I also think about what are the things you can control. And I've worked with so many stressed out kids over the years, and they're concerned about so many things. And sometimes they'll look back and they'll say, oh man, I wish I cared more when I was in ninth grade. But the truth is, you cannot do anything about ninth grade. You can't do anything about your 10th grade grades. But there are things that are in your control. And there are things like essays. Essays are a really big deal right now. They mean a lot. They mean far more now than they did before. Test scores, for example, obviously even for test optional schools, they can really move the needle into whether your child gets in or not. Things like recommendations also mean more than they did before. So when your child is in a public school where the ratio is 300 kids to a counselor, they need to make inroads with their counselor and get to know their counselor before their counselor writes the letter. It's really in their best interest to meet with their counselor, send them an email and say, oh, these are the things you might want to know about me. Those things mean a lot. But I think one of the best things that kids and parents should be, most important thing kids and parents should be aware of is the timing in all of this. And you do not want to wait till the last minute. Ideally, you want kids to do this work over the summer, to get their essays done. It's a lot of work. So although many schools are on the Common App, some aren't. Like, for example, Virginia Tech, they're on the Coalition app. It's the only application they take. So kids may have to do slightly different things. But even if, let's say you're applying to 6 schools, all on the Common Application, it's likely the case that those schools are also going to have 1, 2, or even 3 of their own essays. So if you think that each school might have 2 essays and you're applying to 8 schools, that's 16 essays, and it's a lot of work. So for that reason, like piecemealing out over the summer to have it done by the start of the year is ideal. And the reason is your grades your senior year, they actually count a lot. They're really, really important. And especially if you're waitlisted, you want to make sure that you can send those grades and be proud of them to the school so they can see you're doing a great job in your senior year, and that could get you off the wait list. But early action and early decision, which UVA has, those are November 1st deadlines, and then regular decision is in January. All right, so Robin, I'd love to turn it over to you. And then I thought we would do Q&A. But Robin, I thought you could talk a little bit about the alumni program at UVA.
So this is a resource that we found a lot of folks don't know about, which is surprising given how great of a resource it is. And I will drop a link in the chat once I'm done talking, so you can check out more, but it's called the Admission Liaison Program. And it is for alumni families who have children applying as a first year or a transfer student to any one of UVA's 5 undergraduate schools. And as long as it's a legacy student, child of a degree holder, stepchildren are also considered legacy applicants if they live with their step parent who has a UVA diploma. This program is open to those students. And basically what it does is helps give information to students on how to put their best application forward. So you do an individual meeting with the director or the assistant director of the program. They'll spend 30 minutes with you and go through your transcript and your profile and have a discussion about the strengths and areas of improvement within that student's profile. So like I said, I'm going to go ahead and drop a link to this in the chat so you guys can check it out, because it's definitely an amazing resource if you are a UVA alumni and have a child that would like to apply to UVA in the next couple of years. So I'm dropping that in right now.
Awesome. Thanks, Robin.
Yeah.
I know alumni are so fortunate to have that program because not every school has it. So it's definitely something that parents would want to take advantage of. All right, so thank you, everybody. So I'm looking at the chat. And first of all, thanks to everybody for putting in their information about where they live and the grade level. Looks like we have kids across the spectrum. So let's see. Gerald says, how is the college application process adjusting to virtual learning? Some students due to socioeconomic, demographic, and other challenges have had a harder time with virtual learning. Yes, and certainly that is true. And you know, the failure rate across the country has never been higher. That's the truth. In fact, I was speaking at a school in North Carolina where 41% of students at that high school have at least one failing grade. And although it's pretty extreme, it just shows you that kids are really struggling in the virtual learning situation. But even that, you know, grades still count, and colleges are still looking at how kids are compared to other students at their school. And that's a really big deal. Also on the Common App, there is a question about COVID and how that's impacted you. So if you've had some hardship from COVID, that's certainly something that you can write about. And it's super short, it's like 250 words. So it doesn't take a lot, but if there's something that you want to talk about that has impacted you, you should. On the other hand, if there's something you've done during COVID, somebody else asked about like leadership opportunities. We've seen all kinds of things that kids have done where they've tutored kids, they've started clubs, they've, you know, raised money for foundations, all this stuff. That would be a place. Obviously, you're going to put that on your list of activities. But in the COVID essay, you can talk about that. You know what? I didn't sit around playing Xbox. I did these things to make a difference in my community. And that's a big deal. So if that's something that you can talk about, you definitely should. All right, so go scroll back up here. Let's see. Do we only get recommendations from guidance counselors and school counselors? How about teachers? And it depends on the school. So most schools, they'll say guidance counselors, and guidance counselors are prepared to write those letters. But if some schools will also say, oh, you can, you know, this is optional, but you can send along a teacher recommendation. And if you have a strong relationship with the teacher and that teacher is going to go to bat for you, you should absolutely submit that. It can help you for sure. And thank you, Karen, that Virginia Tech is now on the Common App. All right, so what are your recommendations for extracurriculars and leadership roles since COVID has really precluded these opportunities? It depends on how your student wants to position themselves. For example, maybe your student really loves business and they want to apply to the Chauffeur School of Business at JMU, for example. Like they want to differentiate themselves in that way. So they say, oh, first of all, the Common App essay is consistent with all schools, but schools then have their own essays. And this is where you want them to be totally individualized at that school. You don't want to say, you don't want to write the same essay and just tweak it a little bit. You really want to make it unique. So you really want to say in that essay, why you want to go to X school. It's because this school of business offers these classes, and you've heard a lot about this professor. As an example, that really helps. Schools see that and they think, you know what, this kid's done their homework. This really stands out. They really want to come to the school. At the end of the day, colleges are all about yield, and they want to see that if they're going to accept a child, they want that student to come to their school. So that shows a lot of interest. And if that is the case, then maybe over the summer you do something that shows you really love business. Maybe you start your own little business. I remember my son applied to a film school, and he had a little business where he made music videos for his friend. And he went online and he formed, I think it was an LLC, I can't remember, Fairfax County. And he put that on his application. You can take a class. One of the other things that kids will often do is they'll take a class at Nova over the summer in the field of their interest. And that shows that they're really putting the time and the effort to differentiate themselves. So again, it kind of depends what they want to do. If they want to be a teacher, maybe it's that they've tutored, or if they love sports, it could be that they're a leader on their soccer team and they can talk about the leadership roles they've held there as well. All right, let's see. Any other questions? Robin, anything that you wanted to ask or questions that you had? Oh, I have one more. Let me answer this when I go back to school, back to you, Robin. What recommendations do you have when it's difficult to visit the schools in person? Most admissions tours are not available due to COVID. Yes. First of all, if the school offers interviews online through Zoom, you should absolutely take them. That shows interest. Usually, some schools will have folks that interview people, alumni, and if that's the case, definitely take advantage. But also do things like, when you get an email from the school you're interested in, instead of just looking at it and deleting it, open it up. Many schools track open rates. They track, did you forward? What did you look at? Did you click on a school of business, for example? All of those things do matter because they show interest. And again, interest is a really important factor. Also, at most schools, it's public information who's going to read your application. And so, sometimes kids will, it used to be when you went to college fairs, you would have your little QR code. I can think of the ones at the Fair Oaks Mall, and they have the reps from Fairfax County there, and you go and they'd scan your QR code, and you would meet the rep who's going to introduce yourself and read your application, and then you could send them an email and say it was nice to meet you. Those little things mean a lot. So, if you find out who's reading your application, you can always reach out to them, especially if you have a question. But as much as you can to engage with the college, attend the virtual open houses, all of that stuff, it shows interest. And interest is really, really important now, partly because colleges don't always know what to expect. It used to be their yield was predictable, but now with kids applying to lots of schools, they're not sure who's going to come. So for that reason, they want to bet on a sure thing. And schools are also relying heavily on early decision right now too, the schools that do have early decision. I hope that was helpful. All right, Robin, I will turn it back over to you with any questions or anything else you want to share.
Yeah, so thank you so much, Ann. We really
Sure.
appreciate you taking the time to talk to our group today. Last chance for anyone that has a question for Ann to drop that in the chat, or if you have any questions about that alumni program, we have Elizabeth on the call who works for the Office of Regional Engagement for UVA, so she might be able to answer some questions. I can't make any promises for her, but she might be able to answer some questions if you have any on that, so drop that in the chat as well. Oh, we have one more from Julie. How much advantage does ED give you at UVA or other top schools?
Elizabeth, do you want to take that question?
I don't actually think I can answer that, but Ann, it goes back to that interest that you were saying, which is you're really saying how much this institution, that it is your selection, it's what you want, it's the community that you want to join. And so it goes to that interest that Ann was discussing.
Yeah, and in general, early decision is really meaningful. Usually colleges admit a greater percentage of kids off early decision than they will off early action, and definitely off of regular decision. So if your child's if you're an alum and your child is applying and your child applies regular decision, I have to think the school's thinking, okay, why are you applying regular decision? It could be that interest factor really isn't there, because if you really want to come here and your parents went here, you would be applying early action or early decision. So it does vary, but certainly early decision is a really big factor. And if your child, sees himself at the school like UVA, and that's their top choice, I think applying early decision is a good idea. Okay, let's see. Can you explain the quotas that colleges have based on school or areas? I don't know that much about specific quotas for specific schools, But I do know that the same, one person reads the applications from, say, Madison High School in Vienna. So they're really, really familiar with what Madison High School offers. And parents have that question, I'm applying for Montgomery County. The way they weigh AP courses here is really different than in Virginia. Do kids in Virginia have a leg up, or do we have a leg up? And the answer is because college admissions folks read the applications from the same school, they know what to expect, and they're comparing your child against other kids at that school, not necessarily, a state away. So that's really the biggest factor. I'm not sure of specific quotas at specific schools, but how your child does compared to other kids at that school is important. Their grades are more important than a GPA, because GPAs can be figured differently in different school districts. Can you speak about what's the difference between the pros and cons of early decision and early action? Okay, so early decision is binding. And that means that if you apply to the school and you get in, you have to go. You really, you made a commitment to that school, and you go to that school. However, early action basically says, oh, I'm really interested in this school. I'm going to get my application in early, and hoping that they pick you, but it's not binding. So if you get in there, great, but you don't have to go there. So sometimes when kids aren't totally committed, they're just not going to apply early decision because they're just not sure. And my experience has been that most kids don't apply early decision. It has been in the past, but what we've seen in the last year is that more and more kids are applying early decision, especially if they have a top choice. Can you speak to the financial aid environment? That unfortunately is not my specialty. So I think asking somebody at the college, there are people that just handle financial aid. That might be a better question specifically for a financial aid officer. All right, in deciding which schools to apply early decision, how do you gauge the level of difficulty to get in without test score range? This would be especially important for binding. And that is true. So one of the best ways to gauge whether you might get in is through Naviance. So if you're at a public school and your school has Naviance, it's really neat because you can log in. It's kind of addicting actually, because you can log in and you can go to the UVA page, or you can go to the JMU page, or the University of Maryland page, and you can see, oh, these are the kids that either got in, they got waitlisted, or they got rejected. And these are their test scores, and this is their GPA. So it's fascinating because you can see, where is the cluster of most kids that get in. And that's it gives you an indication of what's happened at your school, because at your school is far more indicative than going to these websites like college data, those types of things, and looking at a national sample. That doesn't matter as much as what's happened with your school. So that should give you a good indication. You'll often see outliers where you'll see kids that maybe had a low GPA or a low test score get in, and it's often that there's a reason. They could have been a recruited athlete, or there's something else that led them to gain entrance to the school. What are the most important things a 10th grader should be doing right now? And a 10th grader should be really focused on their grades. That's the most important thing. Also, if the 10th grader is taking an AP class or two, getting a good grade on the AP exam can be helpful. You can submit those scores too, especially if you take it before the application is due. So I think really, for the most part, 10th graders should just be focused on their grades. Now, after their 10th grade year and in the summer, if they have an opportunity to get a job or to do something of interest, and they know what they want to do in college or what they should want to major in, if it can be along those lines, that can help differentiate them. So when they write their essays, they can say, oh, I've been interested in early childhood education for many years. In fact, the summer after my 10th grade year, I volunteered at a preschool where I did that type of thing. So, really whatever your child's passion is, that's what they should strive for in the summer. And even if their passion, they have no idea what they want to major in college because they're in 10th grade and many don't. Whatever they love to do, maybe they love to play soccer. They can take a leadership position on their soccer team. There's all kinds of things kids can do that don't have to be always related to getting into college. All right. Is it ethical to apply early decision at more than one school? And the answer is no. You wouldn't apply early decision. I don't know if schools compare notes, but I haven't heard of kids applying to more than one school. And Elizabeth might know more about how that works at UVA. But I just don't see that. I see kids picking one school and applying.
And Ann, I agree. I mean, it's early decision going to that. It's the school that you want to go to. So you're putting all that, all the eggs in that basket.
Great. Thanks, Elizabeth, for that. You're right. All right. So Robin, I think those are all the questions we have.
Yeah, it looks like everyone has had a chance to ask their question, which is great. And we just want to thank everybody for coming and for their participation. We hope that this session was really valuable for you. It was recorded, so once we have the YouTube link, we will go ahead and send that out to everyone on the call so you have it for future reference. And Ann, I don't know, do you want us to include your contact information in that email?
Sure, absolutely.
Yeah. So if you come up with any questions later, you can reach out to Ann and ask her. And yeah, we hope that you continue to attend our amazing UVA Club of DC programming. Our website is dchoo's.org. We have a calendar with all of our upcoming events. We also have a Facebook page where we're constantly posting about them. So we would love to see you on future events. We have one question. Can we get copies of the slides?
Yes, I can definitely send copies. And you know what, if you text that number that I showed, and let me pull it up again. Here it is. I'll send you also the copy of the slide. So it's 55444 and type in the word college, and I'll make sure that you get that. That's not a problem at all.
Great. Thank you so much.
Awesome. Thanks, Robin. Elizabeth, so great to see you again. Thank you for having me as always. I wish everybody the very best. And before we go, I'm just really curious. If you could throw your takeaway in the chat, what did you find out tonight that was helpful to you? That would be great. So just go to the chat and just type in one thing that you found helpful that you learned tonight. That would be great. And then we'll close out the evening.
All the comments are very helpful, very helpful. You provided us with a real plan for the next year. That's great.
Awesome. And I'm glad, Christopher, you like Naviance. I've found that to be really helpful. I remember when my kids were applying to school, we used that a lot. The differences between the SAT and ACT. And yes, Adrienne, the interest in the school and how that is so significant. Demonstrated interest, making sure the child opens up the emails they actually get. Adrienne said, I'm also addicted to Naviance. Okay, good. I'm glad you understand how addicting that can be. Interviews, how to weave experiences into the application. Great. Pick one test based on your practice test and other meaningful parts of the application like essays. Look at what schools on Naviance the students at the school got into and which didn't. Awesome. Well, thank you everybody for that. I appreciate it. That's good feedback for me. And again, hope you guys have a great rest of the school year. If I can help in any way, just reach out. Have a good evening. Bye-bye.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you. Bye-bye.